This evening is to provide a meaningful 2 hours that we spend together. And rather than starting my book as I normally do, I decided on a change up and have made notes to share with you about K-12 schools, its current predicament, as a segue into my book that I will introduce also differently, after which we can discuss some issues and share any perspectives that you might have. My book has been called A Sobering, Penetrating, and Uplifting Read. The vantage point I share with you tonight is an equally sobering perspective on K-12 schools, a heterodox viewpoint for certain. This frame of mind centers around what I call the bastardization of teaching and learning, which I hold is dysfunctional, foolhardy, and a disservice to school communities from Maryland to California. To be certain, not everyone shares my views, including those on the left, many superintendents, school board members, and colleagues who were and remain quite willing, it is my view, to drink the Kool-Aid in order to avoid criticism. I maintain that while there are successful schools that dot the American landscape, they differ greatly from those in the main. And when I use the word education this evening, I refer to students receiving meaningful instruction. I do not mean indoctrination, expecting staff, students, parents, and whole communities to accept a set of beliefs uncritically, which is heavily practiced and I believe smothering meaningful education in our schools around the country. We've known for 247 years that essential to our liberties, our freedoms that we hold dear, is an educated populace. However, for the near 40 years of my experience as an educator, I know well that schools are a microcosm of society. And America has willfully reduced the quality of K-12 schools by way of a twofold setback. We've dumbed down education, while at the same time we've defined deviancy down, accepting ill behavior on the part of youngsters and professional adults that years ago would have been found unacceptable. I suspect that my experience years ago as a firefighter outside Washington, D.C. prior to my military service, and later while attending the University of Maryland, accounts for a recurring image that I have, probably for the last 10 years, but more razorly over the last, say, 5 years. This image is of a fire hose. It's held by what I believe are radical organizations, woke corporations, local, state, and national representatives, lawmakers, the White House, Secretary of Education, and school officials. And the fire hose is aimed at America. Moms and dads raising families, business owners who provided a service, created jobs in various communities, and everyday, hardworking, tax-paying Americans. And instead of being deluged with water, we're being subjected to a barrage of incoherent, misguided, dangerous policies, a philosophy of failing, threatening practices in every sector of society, from immigration to transportation, energy, national economic policy, and for tonight's purposes, education, where we see an ideology and policies that are nonsensical, wholly inappropriate for school-age youngsters, policies and activities that are hurtful to students, staff, parents, entire communities, a philosophy that thwarts meaningful education and ignores, of all things, standards of behavior, erases academic standards, disparages or criticizes, of all things, merit, rigor, and prevents our youngsters from experiencing what otherwise should be a successful K-12 robust education. A philosophy that goes on to hinder all these kids' future livelihoods. And I'm mindful of a quote that I came across probably 40 years ago, attributed to our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, that America will never be destroyed from the outside. Well, that could be debatable today in this century. That if we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. It'll come from within. And I thought at the time, I was a fairly young teacher, I guess. God, it seems so long ago, at a place called Glenelg High School. And I don't know, a century later, probably about 2 years later, our 40th president, President Reagan, and this was at the time that we were looking at our K through 12 schools in America, and the report that was produced was called Nation at Risk. And he said then that our freedom, all of our freedoms, is but a generation away from extinction. He was frustrated at the report. There were a number of horrors about that report, but among which was the fact that of all the kids graduating at the time, this would have been 1983, 13% of kids with diplomas could not read. We were aghast. And we did what we always do. We spent billions of dollars on education. A good deal of which, by the way, goes to teachers' unions coffers and political coffers, 99% of which would be Democrat. So here we are, 162 years since Lincoln, 42 years since President Reagan. And do you think we have been wise enough to take heed? Because many do. And I think, and I believe that anyone saying yes is sorely mistaken. In 2023 America, we observe school district policies nationwide that promote a radical, dangerous philosophy under the umbrella diversity, equity, and inclusion. This would include gender ideology, CRT, known as critical race theory, which, by the way, members on both sides of the aisle, black and white, liberal and conservative, have deemed a lie, based on falsehoods.
It is a lie that it's taught in school.
This would include, thank you, this would include,
Only taught in law school.
this would include identity politics and restorative justice over a comprehensive school-wide discipline policy that would emphasize self-discipline and exercising better judgment. And along with all this, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking millions of dollars and vast human resources expanding an already bloated bureaucracy. That's where we are right now. And as I mentioned in a recent Washington Times op-ed piece, I understand that that was posted, I believe, on your website. All of this is done at the expense of honesty, historical perspective, students and their families, and our country. It is also entirely disconcerting to me that in American school districts, superintendents and school boards, including here, would issue a letter several weeks ago to their respective school communities extolling and highlighting the participation of schools in the Marxist Black Lives Matter School of Action. Thank you.
Go get your own room.
Thank you. An organization.
Without disruption.
But you're not being quiet, let the man speak.
Without disruption.
We're all being quiet here, Mr. Wallis.
Please have respect for the speaker.
An organization responsible for the mayhem and destruction of our cities, along with the burning down of a Minnesota police precinct. An organization which aims to obliterate the American nuclear family of mom and dad, tear up the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. An organization that follows a philosophy that is the basis, for God's sakes, for the theory and practice of communism.
What's your evidence of
And whether regarding gender,
Excuse me, this gentleman has offered his time to us. I think it would be very important if we could just give him the courtesy of letting him speak. And you are free to think whatever you like, but if there is gonna be constant disruption, we will have to ask you to leave. We don't wanna do that. We do wanna be together. Let's listen to this gentleman, please.
Would there be
Thank you.
question time at the end?
whether regarding gender, history, or race, when subjected to empirical evidence, research, qualitative, quantitative, both sides of the aisle, these are based on falsehoods, on lies. In fact, we have an exceptional, wonderful country here that is presently
Yes.
very much struggling. This is completely lost on those who, ironically, have the responsibility to teach our youngsters, but instead spend precious time and taxpayer dollars on what I call this poisonous woke nonsense. We have two organizations, esteemed organizations, NCES, the National Center for Education Statistics, and its companion, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP. NAEP puts out a report every year, often referred to as the nation's report card. So they take a look at what we look like as a nation academically. NCES takes a look at the physical climate of schools. NCES reports that 10 million students any given academic year are bullied. 160,000 of whom remain home on any given day. Their psyches are frail. They fear going to school. All because adults who should know better, and I cover this in the book, have not intervened to stop this mayhem. We have 350,000 education personnel every academic year. Imagine that. They could be teachers, they often are. Could be administrators, school bus drivers, cafeteria workers, volunteer parents, school secretaries, who are threatened in the course of any one academic year. 350,000 people. 210,000 people, school personnel, are physically assaulted in your average academic year. We're talking 180 days, ladies and gentlemen, not 365 days. 2 million youngsters who admit carrying weapons to school. Meanwhile, NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, states that things are so bad now in the United States, their words, that as America's students matriculate through school, they do less well in key academic areas. To the point that this last graduating class, only 25% of students, American students, 12th graders, passed math proficiency. Only 37% of students were proficient in reading. And the rest of the subjects are pretty much the same way. In fact, they're almost exactly the same way. Civics, geography, science, you're talking 20, 24, 22% respectively. U.S. history, 12.5 to 13% of all the kids. Now we're talking last year, 3 million students. Only 12 to 13%, imagine, were proficient. Imagine getting a diploma, having a diploma, and roughly 87% of all students don't know anything about their country, really.
Yeah.
And those that do, a lot of that is what we call indoctrination. Let's go back to reading for a second. I mentioned to you Ronald Reagan's quote 42 years ago. At the time, 13% of graduates, as I said, we were aghast, we were amazed. 13% of graduates couldn't read. So out of that 37% who were proficient, that leaves, if my math is correct, 63% who were not. And of that 63%, 19%, almost 1 out of 5 students received a diploma last year that they cannot read. Imagine. They'll join the other 14% of Americans who do not read. And of those who do, by the way, 21% read at the 5th grade reading level. Our country is in a dire position right now as we sit here tonight. So, I contend that if this continues, this charade, in fact, I contend that any sovereign nation, the United States, if we continue to accept the nonsense that passes really for education today, we can only do that for so long before we become anything but a sovereign nation. This has got to turn around. And so, I think it's abundantly clear that school officials today have forgotten what an education is. Many of them simply have no idea of the high expectations and the self-discipline required to obtain an education. It's awfully, awfully necessary. And as this continues, this charade, school districts will continue to steal what I think is personal agency. Students, year after year after year, who want to be architects of their own future are not allowed to do so. It's being stolen from them. So amidst what I call this behavioral and academic carnage is a book. Published several months ago, Dead Last, The Triumph of Character, of Passion. I wanted to, and teamwork in education, I want to read what people from Seattle said. Reading your book, Mr. Wallis, was like happening upon a rainbow. We're dying out here. Imagine. This book is not written by anybody at the university. It's not written by anybody with the teachers union, nor is it written by anyone affiliated with the organization, the National School Boards Association, who, by the way, thought it was appropriate to let the White House know that any parent who vociferously goes to a school board to demand better schools should be tagged a domestic terrorist. Now, this book is written by an in the trenches, nationally recognized, successful school administrator. And I loved what I did. Loved what I did. So Dead Last then really presents how to bolster classroom instruction, how you derive good student behavior, how you boost student academic achievement, and how you cultivate active support of parents and communities. And anyone familiar with the recent midterm elections knows there are people that really believe, running for local, state, and national offices, that parents have no say in the education of their youngsters, that you're to get the kids to school, and that's it. They do not want to hear from you. And when I first heard that a few months ago, and I believe it was Virginia, I think it was during the gubernatorial campaign in Virginia, former Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe had said just that. Well, I knew right away this is an unserious person. And I treat the issue of unserious people regarding education in the book as well. And the book is presented, by the way, through the prism, sort of unique, of my having taken the helm of what we call an in-crisis school. Maryland State Police call it a hotspot community. There are several throughout the state of Maryland so designated because of the degree of criminality.
No, structural racism.
And so, this school was replete, like many, with disrespectful, disruptive, frequently violent student behavior. All student, district, and state test scores were in the dumpster. No different than the schools we're looking at right now with Baltimore City. Low staff morale, parents expressing their abject frustration with what they considered widespread inferior teaching, administration incompetence at the school level and also at the school district level. They tired of writing, a former superintendent that retired at the time, that for 3 years they said did nothing. We're tired of having to call the police regarding increasing threatening behavior on the part of students. And we feel stuck, Mr. Wallis. After they were talking to me, saying in their words that the school was completely out of control, they didn't know what to do. We chatted for another hour or so. They were there probably within 2 hours of my arrival at the school, first day. And they felt a little hopeful, probably cautiously optimistic, but I would say more cautiously than they were optimistic. They didn't really know me. But let's fast forward 4 years for tonight's purposes. 4 years, the exact same school, and the school is being recognized for its teaching excellence, its student academic achievement performance, and its active parent involvement. It's being touted at the time by the Washington Post as among the top 30 schools in the Virginia, Washington, D.C., Maryland metropolitan area. Later, I get a call, probably a week or two later, from the Maryland State Department of Education. It happened to be the testing coordinator who said, you know, Mr. Wallis, you weren't there, but nonetheless, your school was among those that have been the bane of my existence. And I'm here to tell you that after these last 3 years looking at your scores, this year we can report that Harper's Choice is among the top schools with all student groups, male and female, having reached or exceeded Maryland State academic standards. We were thrilled. And I would tell you, honestly, the fact is, it's never a one-person show. This would never have been possible if I didn't have the support of those kids who wanted to turn around. They not only met the expectations, they often would exceed your expectations. The staff who really wanted to get back into teaching, real teaching. Now at that point, a number of the teachers were gone. And I recommended their firing, and they were moved on, some to retire, some were just simply left the profession. And the parents were so happy, so involved in the school at this point. Maybe a month later, the school was then designated a national school of excellence. And I can tell you, when I announced that to the kids and the staff and the volunteer parents in the school, there's a hospital nearby. I'm sure if you were at Howard Community Hospital, Howard General Hospital, you heard the roar from those folks. They were ecstatic. So dead last answers the question. How was it possible that such a horrible school community, typical of many schools throughout the country, even remotely was able to experience such a positive education transformation? And when you read the book, there are sundry examples and activities and policies that were put forward to really move the academic needle and really curb the misbehavior. But I wanted to cite a few things for you. They all fall under most of the kinds of things I cite here for you. I mean, in order to have a meaningful education, it's required that character, in my view, be made the soul of the school. And when it is, by the way, teaching and learning are rooted in honesty, historical accuracy. Kids want to do well. As they matriculate through each grade level, they capitalize on the academic excellence that they showed in the previous year. I mean, they actually demonstrated it. They carry this through the high school. So I would maintain connection with this high school, happened to be called Wild Lake High School. And people would talk about, and the administration would tell me, Mr. Wallis, we have kids from several schools, and all of us have really a mobile demographic in that area. In this case, they said the kids from Harper's Choice were most involved in student government, active in their academic classes. The kids would tell you that they took and were involved in wholesome extracurricular activities, the values from which they tell you they will take into adulthood. It's beautiful. These are things they just never thought of or did previously. And it all started for them at Harper's Choice Middle School. And contrary to what those proponents of DEI say about kids, about race, for example, and people being victims and other people being oppressors, those kids wouldn't even know what you're talking about. Their classmates were their classmates. They didn't care what you looked like. They didn't care what your parents made. And they developed this real interest in family. That started at Harper's Choice with our value system. They realized how important family was. And many of those kids didn't have much of a family. We worked with them all the time. But the kids understood that family really is a building block, and that families and schools need to work together. In fact, schools need to reinforce the values that families should be inculcating in their kids. That's what I expected. That's what families were doing. And those kids could not have done better. And you know what else I found with those kids? Still talking about character. that because of that, these kids developed an appreciation for what I call a reverence for it, the way they would talk about it. An ever more united states of America. They were, in fact, informed patriots as they matriculated through 6th, 7th, 8th, through the 12th grade. It was beautiful to watch. And my point is, that can be replicated throughout the United States. There's just no question. From a near 40-year administrator, I am telling you, that can be done. What else was, if you're going to have character, and this seemed to be a big deal to people. It's amazing. I incorporated, of all things, if you can believe it, standards of behavior. It's amazing how many school districts don't understand the importance of having real, meaningful standards of behavior, and not only for the kids, but for professional staff. Academic standards had to be established. They had to be understood. No more were kids going to be passed and not know what they were doing. We just weren't going to do it at Harper's Choice. We already had a number of kids. Again, mobile demographics, so a lot of the kids were not in Howard County schools, but a whole host of kids had been in Howard County schools. And I had a number of kids in school in Howard County for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, 2 in the 8th grade. They couldn't read. A number of kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th. So I did what I thought we should do, that so many schools that are ill-aligned today with what's necessary for success just don't know. We adopted the values that underscore successful schools, and rather than go into those, it is in the book. You're welcome to take a look at that. We implemented what I call research-based best practices. In every subject, these team leaders, the reading specialists, the math specialists, these teachers understood, you're here to teach the kids. You're not here to be their friends at all. They have other friends. You're here to be role models. You're here because you're hired to teach English, a world language. PE, it didn't make any difference to me. You needed to know, what the best practices are throughout the United States. We were online, we were on the telephone. I was on telephone with school administrators throughout the United States regularly for those years. We did that. I also tailored with the staff, we tailored a professional development strand that allowed the staff to meet specific academic targets. You couldn't help but have good teachers in that kind of a professional development training. You have to. But it takes hard work. You have to do that. You have to make that happen in every school. And that just doesn't seem to be a priority in many schools. In fact, the schools that I've been in, many of them, don't even pretend that meaningful education is that big of a priority. It is chaotic in many of these schools. And it doesn't have to be. And I don't feel for the administrators, people running schools at all. They shouldn't be in those schools. They should be fired. I can't help but think that there are many people, many Americans that would love to be in that position and make a difference in kids' lives, and in teachers' lives, including in this county. We opted, and this was pretty incredible. I approached the faculty. In fact, the first day when I worked with the faculty, they must have thought I was from another planet. And I explained everything to them regarding instruction, what we wanted to do. And I asked them if they were comfortable adopting, instead of the hackneyed use of the word diversity, our 13-letter, our country's motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. That we were all Americans. We're right here in an American community called Harper's Choice, tough area, okay. An American public school, but we can do this. And we should do it because anything we do, particularly within education, should be to improve the individual, improve the family, improve the community, improve society, improve America. They bought into it. They liked it. That's what we went by. We moved, as I said, a number of unsatisfactory teachers out. I didn't focus on identity politics, big with school districts, including this one. There was a focus on continuous improvement, making connections and partnerships. We instituted a Dress for Success Day. Every Wednesday, kids came in shirt and tie. Couldn't make them, it's a public school, but a lot of kids just loved it, and it was growing each year. We developed and I told the families, listen, if that's a problem for you, it's no sweat. I'll work with the PTA. We'll get you a shirt and tie. They all recognized that and very much wanted to do it. And this school just started catapulting to excellence. The partnerships that we developed. There was a school called River Hill. I'm out of state a lot, so some of these names won't come to me quickly. River Hill, and at the time they had as a high school, good area, nice area. They had something like 21 business education partnerships, and people were going, wow, that's pretty good. Turned out that Harper's Choice wound up having 32 business education partnerships, among which were some of the finest people you would want affiliated with your school. One was the Rotary, the Howard County Rotary. Businessmen and women, successful businessmen, businesswomen, would host their meetings monthly. I approached them, made a presentation similar to this. They said, sure, we'd love to work with you, Mr. Wallis. And it wasn't but a few weeks later, I asked them, listen, how about every other month you hold your meetings at Harper's Choice? And they said, before you met with us, Mr. Wallis, we would have said thank you, but no thank you. Well, they did. And you had to be there to see it. The kids knew up front, because we worked with them, that if Gail Bates, haven't seen you in years. Let's say Miss Bates came in, she's with the company, she's CEO of a company, she's with the Rotary, she comes in. Kwame Johnson, great kid, will walk up to her and say, hi, you're Miss Bates, hi Miss Bates, nice to meet you. He knew to look at her, straight in the eye, he knew to give her a firm handshake. And then as they're walking down, he said, I'll be escorting you to your meeting. You had to see it to believe it. So I'd be coming up the hallway, and these different kids would be meeting different businessmen and businesswomen for their meeting in the library. And these kids would be asking, what do you think I should do, next year? And as I go, I'm going to be in high school soon. What should I do in high school so I can be as successful as you are? Well, I tell you, every person with the Rotary simply loved it. They looked forward to coming to Harper's Choice every once in a while. It was really quite nice. We had a partnership with a gentleman with I'll just tell you a couple of these. Computer refurbishing company. And so I had the faculty find out. I said, don't put any kids on the spot, but in homeroom, give me an idea of what families don't have particular access at home to technology. So we started this program. Every few weeks or so, I'd hold a technology education night. And so kids would have to sign a contract. Parents weren't happy about that. Kids weren't happy about that. And I said, well, that's okay. Don't come to technology education. That's fine. We'll work with other kids. They all could make it. So they had to sign this contract saying they would not get a single discipline referral. They would not get below a C, and they would not miss a single day of school. I told the parents, your son or daughter should be on death's bed, and I'd be very sorry for you, but he or she better be on death's bed if they're not going to be in school. You cannot be truant, you can't miss. It's not that you can get 2 referrals and it not be a big deal. No, you get a single referral, we take the equipment back. And what did they get? They signed this contract, they were psyched about it. They got a computer, they got a monitor, they got a modem, they received a printer, and they received a library card from the Howard County Library. Because I contacted the library director and I said, listen, I'm going to hold these technology education nights, but I'd like a representative here. Fortunately, she had a student, a youngster, was there my first year. She loved what was happening at the school. She said, Mr. Wallis, I'm in. We'll have people up there. And I'm telling you, these kids, it was like they received a gold bar. They had their own Howard County library card. They'd never seen, they'd never been to a library, many of them. Some had, but most, I would dare say, had not. We did that program for several years, over 9 years that I was there. When I would hold anything at night, I would make sure the police were there, taking care of the parking lot. and keeping things, you know, so your car wouldn't get keyed. That was a problem in the community. But it all started going away. I started an afternoon program from 3 to 6 p.m. with the staff. They were wonderful. Couldn't have done it without them. And so it kept the kids off the street from 3 to 6. They were involved with Howard County Parks and Recs, Howard County Police, and Howard County staff. There was tutoring going on. They could play ball with the police. They worked with Howard County's Parks and Recs on different games and what have you. And that's the time of day, and the county police would tell me that, Mr. Wallis, it's going to reduce our home break-ins, it's going to reduce our bullying, it's going to reduce any of the drug and alcohol problems that we have, the inappropriate sexual behavior that we find, because many of these kids are latchkey kids. Parents aren't home, they're by themselves. They don't know what else to do. This ended a lot of that, and it put a positive dent in the community. So it was just things like that that we did throughout that made it happen. One, if I could mention one, and then I'll end up. One more was, among many partnerships, was with the Office on Aging. Now imagine coming into the school, these are people, some of whom were in their 80s. They couldn't wait to get to Harper's Choice. I had them meet with the math specialists, the reading specialists, and they would be trained by them. So the following week, they would come in and they had different kids who just didn't know their math facts or were deficient in reading. So I had this intergenerational thing going in a library that we really fought for, by the way. I fought tooth and nail to get that. It had an old, outdated library. We made it into what I guess they call them all media centers now. And it was beautiful. Anyway, these people would be in there weekly. And so one day they come up to me, elderly man, he was 86, retired CEO, pretty good shape. He said, Mr. Wallis, he said, this young, beautiful student and I have a question for you. We want to adopt maybe a mascot or something for all of us in there that all of us called themselves geezers who are working with the kids. I said, you mean like you want to be called maybe like the Reading Raiders? Is that what you're telling me? He goes, exactly, that's what we want. I said, you can call yourself anything you want, and I'll get you t-shirts. They loved it. For the near 10 years that I was there, just over 9 years, they loved it, and they met with those kids religiously. That's the way it was. We did these kinds of things because we knew it was going to catapult academic excellence. Now, 2 separate book publishing company review committees called Dead Last the most comprehensive K through 12 read in America. They like 2 things, they told me. One is taking the reader on a journey from failure to excellence. And secondly, presenting a number of the obstacles, the challenges in American education that, like tin cans, are kicked down the road and they're never really solved adequately, whether it's school choice, the academic achievement gap. Why is it that some kids don't do as well as others? And I'm here to tell you it has nothing to do with race, much less racism. What is it about vocational technical education that we now have 10 million jobs that don't require a college degree, but go unfilled today? 10 million. I lay that at the doorstep of our schools. We used to do a great job of that in some of the high schools many, many years ago. We can do that. School safety and security. I can't tell you the number of times that the people express appreciation. I went out to Littleton, Colorado for spring break one time and met with students and staff at Columbine High School. And I'd written for years op-ed pieces on schools. And this one, I wanted to make sure that everyone understood that what happened there and what happened at Parkland over at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, 5 years ago. What happened this past October, a year ago, in Uvalde, Texas. Tragedies that should never have happened. They didn't have to happen. And while I can't guarantee that when you read this book, a tragedy won't strike your school. In the best settings, we're human. A tragedy can happen. But I can near 100% guarantee you that you would never see such a tragedy in your school if you followed the principles I outlined in that book. It's simply true. We can do this. After all, I'm telling you, these people were regular people. to my knowledge. I know I'm not a genius. There may have been a genius in there somewhere with the kids and the parents and the staff. These were ordinary people who took a horrible school setting and created a top-tier, student-engaged, teacher-respected, parent-proud, and community-appreciated, solid school setting. Who wouldn't want that in any community? I don't care if we're talking Baltimore City, if we're talking South Central LA, or we're talking Boise. It doesn't make any difference. San Diego, right here in Elkridge, Philadelphia, where I'm originally from, Boston, back down to Washington, D.C., over to Lansing, down to New Orleans. We can do this, but it starts with everyone saying to themselves, no longer will we tolerate the utter nonsense that is or passes for education today. We're not going to do it. And join various coalitions. And I mean various coalitions like Moms for Liberty, Parents Defending Education, and the lot. Because millions of people are counting on those of us who care that much about schools. And I'm really hoping that a coalition like this one, Moms for Liberty, proves to be the catalyst that really advances education and turns around our situation. We need to do that. And on that note, I will tell you, I thank you very much for having me out tonight. I'm happy to stay. I'm happy to engage in any dialogue and have a discussion with you. And I appreciate very much you having me out, and wish all of you, genuinely, all of you, your families, and your friends and neighbors, all the best. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Wallis, and I'm from Baltimore City. I thought it was important to come here, not because it's Moms for Liberty, because it's parents. Anybody here who's a parent understands that their little one is not just their everything, but it's also sometimes their motivation. Sometimes it's that will to go on. Sometimes maybe somebody faces a sickness, or somebody has lost a spouse, and that child will look at that face, and you just know that you have to keep going. We're among the district where 0 students in 13 schools. I'm almost shivering because here's my son right here, Juan. He is not in the 13 schools that are mentioned. 6,300 students in these 13 schools, and not 0. My son is not at that high school. Not at the top high schools, that 11%, this is talking Poly, Baltimore School for the Arts, the big guns. He's at the National Academy Foundation. I didn't print a progress report. A's and B's, right here. A's and B's. Why can I say that? Because I have a close relationship with Ms. Lampkin, the principal. Ms. Lampkin has assured me that as the leader of that school, she hasn't ever mentioned anything about how she voted, or how I voted, or who I'm married to, or how much I make, or how she makes, or what. Her number one priority is Juan. He has chosen hotel hospitality and restaurant management as his major. He's working towards that. And I want to share that the reason that this matters to me is because this son was born at 1.6 pounds at 24 weeks. Nothing is going to hold me back from advocating for every child that their dreams are fulfilled. He can work in Paris or anywhere. My goal is for Juan to reach his goal, and Ms. Lampkin and me are his biggest supporters.
Should we do questions when we're done? Because we have some stuff to do.
Yeah, we saw it.
Mr. Wallis,
Is that okay if I say that? Because it's going.
Over here in the
forever.
corner, Sharon, get up.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Fran.
One of the things that struck me when I read your book was in the beginning, you said that you made certain requirements known to the administrative administration and the superintendent went,
Okay.
that if you went into the school, you would be allowed to do certain things that not every principal was going to be allowed to do, and I just wondered what that was, and if that's something, I mean, if we wanted all our principals to do the things that are in your book, is that possible without, support from the central office?
No. 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 You have to have a school district that understands the absolute pivotal importance of character. It's that important, and we've gotten away from that. They have to understand the importance of standards of behavior, academic standards. That's what kids want. It is a lie to think that kids don't want those kinds of things, that they just want to raise hell in schools. That's just not true. And the kids that are in school that shouldn't be in there because of their disruption, they have to understand you have to get them in an alternative setting. But they don't want to do that, mostly because of identity politics. It is crazy. So we have schools that are filled with many, many kids who need help that the comprehensive school cannot give. You need an alternative education program. It was so badly needed that I created one right there in the school. I had it right there. And then a number of the kids had to go to the alternative education program that the county has. But it was like pulling teeth to get them to understand why these kids needed to be there.
7:30.
That's really important. The whole issue of character and standards. And so any superintendent, I remember there was a so-called headhunting company out of Chicago that came to interview me for 3 hours in Baltimore City. Asked me if I would take a position out of state and for a superintendent. And I said, you know, at the time I was working for the Heritage Foundation. I was running for the Calvert Institute of Public Policy, and our kids were young and what have you. And I didn't want to yank them out of school. My wife had just started a business, and I said, no, but thank you. I genuinely appreciate it. And they too had mentioned so often, too many school officials have gotten away from knowing exactly what is required for a genuinely rigorous, robust education. You just can't continue to go in and feel that it's an 8 to 3 o'clock job and then go home. It takes so much more than that. The community, you are that community's education CEO. Act like it. You need to know everything there is to know about excelling everyone, teaching and learning. That's your gig. That's what you do. And too many of them don't, and some of them become involved with school bureaucracy. And I'm sorry to tell you, Trent, no, some of them won't support that. And when they don't, these principals are not going to be able to do it. They just won't be able to do it. It's amazing what we were able to do, really. I mean, the fact that, I told the superintendent, I said in the book, that I'll abide by certainly the regulations we have for the teacher union contract and that kind of thing. But he knew I wasn't going to tolerate any nonsense. Not from, I had people that would go into classes and they were drunk. They were drinking. And this was what they would do year after year. Just walk into classes and give hell to some of these teachers. It was just too out of control. Someone would come in the front office and really get ugly with me because he or she didn't like another either administrator, another guidance counselor, or another teacher. And I'd want to talk about it and they would get so rude. And all of that, I'm telling you, every bit of that ended when I had each one of them arrested. We tolerated no nonsense. And I'm telling you an interesting story. We have it here. We're in Maryland, so I was out of state the other day. So you're familiar with the Safeway store. I don't know if it's still there, but there was a Safeway store in this community. Manager comes over to me. I believe I told this in the book. Trent, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I did. Manager comes over and says, listen, I know you're a new administrator here, but I've talked to the school district. I've talked to former principal here, and I've talked to all the different schools in Missouri. I can't get any help. Kids every day steal from us. Every day. When I talk to their parents about it, the parents threaten us. So the regional vice president just left, and they're going to pull the Safeway store. I will wind up going somewhere else. Can you help? So I said, okay, all right, let's go. Show me what you're doing, let's go over. So I went over, walked over with him to the store. Saw that there's a state or a county police substation there. which always amazed me because we always had, when I got there, I'll tell you later on if you're interested, about this homeless encampment right there on the school property with mattresses stacked under the portable classrooms. Been like that, they said, for years. That was my first day on the job. But anyway, back to the Safeway story. We go over to that same area, and I talked to the policeman, and he said, I said, could you help us? And I want to talk to the man, I want to go over there, and we want to see if we can stop all the stealing that's going on, yada, yada, yada. Well, he couldn't help me. So I said, put your duty officer on the phone. He does so. I talked to the duty officer. By the time I got off the phone with him, the officer said, Mr. Wallis, I'm yours. We go over together with the manager, take a look at everything that's going on, take a look at his cameras and what have you. We discussed the situation. I asked the officer, can you come up with a trespass letter? He said, well, I really don't, I said, I'll do it. I said, but once you identify the kids, you have to work with this officer. And I said, you will in fact arrest anybody stealing, including their parents. He said, yes. So I told the kids, we're a character school, come on. That anybody coming to school can no longer stop in to the Safeway store without a parent. I called the state's attorney in Maryland and got their support that when the kids are leaving for school from their home and going to school or to home from the school, they're mine. Because too many of the kids over the years have been bullied. And so I tell a story in the book about how we stopped that with senior citizens. It was great. But anyway, the bottom line is after kids were arrested and had to be, all of that stopped. The thievery stopped. The parents decided the parents would not get involved until they were inconvenienced. Once they were, they told their kids, you stay out of that Safeway. You stop this, you stop that. It all ended.
Did you offer food?
I beg your pardon?
Did you offer food to the kids?
Like free breakfast?
Yeah.
Did we do that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, every morning we offered food and breakfast. And that is not an excuse, believe me.
It's not an excuse.
No. And I should tell you, we fed everybody pretty well in the morning. So, yes ma'am.
I'd like to say, or talk about or suggest or bring up some of the things that you did incorporated to build character. Seem to fall under an umbrella of a certain kind of person's idea of character. For example, wear a tie and shirt to school on Achievement Day, which is to suggest that only people who go to work in shirts and ties are acceptable, have achieved.
Yes.
And how about the kid in the shirt and tie whose dad is a mechanic? See, when you bring in,
Are you suggesting mechanics can't wear a shirt and tie?
well, I wouldn't, because that's what it is.
I'm not quite sure. That wouldn't be smart.
But, and the
The
other,
aspect called personality.
So if we're gonna be asked
We can't stay here all night.
He had an answer.
Wait, you guys,
I wanted to finish, I just wanted to finish before it was
let's do what we
interrupted.
used to do. Don't talk unless you have my glasses.
And, I got distracted with the mechanic wearing a shirt and tie because you would get your tie stuck in the engine and all kinds of things. But my point is about when we bring your kids into school, you want to teach them something as the adults. We want to instill
Yes, ma'am.
values in those kids.
Yes.
Do we have to take into consideration that not everyone has the same value, but they're all values?
Yes.
Or they said, like, we want to do something for every kid. That every kid in your school gets to go to that computer thing and never miss one day. No, one day where you're thrown out.
That's right.
Well, what if the child has an autoimmune disease?
Well, what happened as a result of that was that all kids, all student groups represented in that school, it was unbelievable, met or exceeded academic standards. They understood. I wasn't going to tolerate that you could disrespect a teacher twice.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about is, how many of those kids were special ed?
They didn't exist.
We had
Or do we just,
We had
or
a
do we
level
just?
4 regional special education class, very, very difficult, those kids. They too met or exceeded. It was the first time ever. You have to have standards. If someone has a crazy excuse, what have you, that really has to be heard, you know.
I'm
we're
almost
gonna
done.
do
The
that.
last thing I'd like to say is that Safeway is my Safeway. That's where I live. And I have just recently watched police officers herd children home away from those schools. And not one child was a white child. You'd never see that in River Hill. You would never see children being herded and treated like second-class citizens. And by the way, I don't know what happened, they're still stealing. They're still stealing all the time. And because we never got to the root problem in the first place. I'm done. I'm done.
We can't, well, okay, we're gonna
My name is
let,
Jen, and my pronouns are she, her. Nice to meet you. I was just curious, you had said, when you were principal, are you all your stories are referenced from like 16 years ago? Is that accurate?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay. So, let me ask you this. If someone asked you if you wanted to buy a 16-year-old computer, what would you say?
Probably wouldn't want to do that.
Right, why? Because it's out of date, right? Out of date. So my question to you is, what do you know about trauma as a white man, trauma-informed practices? What do you know about that when it comes to education?
I think that, I personally think that.
No, I don't need you to answer that. That's asking him.
no, wait,
I'm
wait.
not here for you. I'm not here for him. I'm not here for you. You wanna write a book? I'll come for you.
Well-
I'm here for him.
Can we have the glasses for her?
Well,
Or him.
since I'm tonight's speaker, I'll gladly talk with you about any of those issues after.
Why?
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 For liberty.
Why?
I'm